Anyone who has ever taken a history course in the public schools has been lied to. And that's kind of important. The purpose of history teaching in schools is not to teach history. The point of history is to study how people have behaved in the past and why, and how we can see those patterns shaping up today. History gives us an understanding of the world as we know it. In the schools, it's not taught for that reason. Thinking has nothing to do with it. And that's true even if you get to university. Most of it is memorizing what they like to call facts. It's not about thinking at all. What happens, therefore, is that people come into the world with a false image of why it is the way it is. Now, this isn't the fault of the high school teachers. This is the fault of the school boards, the governments, and the parents. And that's because the school boards and the governments and the parents don't want reality taught. They want lies. Because to them, the prime purpose of studying history is to become patriotic. There are a lot of things that happen in history that don't develop patriotism. The United States, for example, has fought some 200 wars since 1775. Most of them against native peoples, against small countries that couldn't possibly reach them. But boy, you read an American high school history text, and every one of those wars was started by the other side. It was never started by the Americans. Also in American history, you can read about how Thomas Jefferson wrote the lines into the American Constitution that all people are created equal. The Revolution had nothing to do with all people being equal. For openers, women were not equal, and they wouldn't be for over 100 years after the Revolution. Slaves were not equal to white people. The man who wrote that line, Thomas Jefferson, had 175 slaves, of whom 4 were his sons. George Washington was one of the biggest slave owners in the U.S., perhaps the biggest. When I was in elementary school, I learned the story of Dallard des Ormeaux. He was a person from Montreal in the 1600s, and the story went, he heard that the Iroquois were coming to attack Montreal, and therefore he gathered the people of Montreal, and he got volunteers to go out and stop the Indians before they could get to Montreal. Well, why would he go out to stop them? Common sense would tell you Montreal had fortifications. This was the place to stay if you're going to be attacked. But they went out, according to the historian, determined to die for their colony. So they went up the Ottawa River. They saw a small group of Indians coming, and they attacked them. What they didn't know was behind that small group of Indians was a big group of Indians. And they were all killed. All of the French colonists from Montreal who went were all killed. And the historian wrote, "Such was the valor of the people of New France." Well, what really happened is they weren't going out there to get killed, and the Iroquois weren't heading to attack Montreal. The Iroquois had a fur trade with the Western Indians. They got the furs, paddled down the Ottawa, took them to the U.S. and sold them in the U.S. Dallard des Ormeaux and his men went out to attack the Iroquois and steal their furs. That's what it was all about. And they lost. So in the history books, these men who are really murderers and thieves became heroes and proof of the valor of the people of the colony, and makes us proud to be Canadians. The other big lie you find is that Native peoples are often referred to as savages. In fact, almost always. And we have an image of them as savage people. They weren't. They were civilized. They had all the marks of civilization. They had government structures. They had religion. They had a society so well organized that they were able to keep law and order without having a police force. In some respects, they had government far more advanced than the Europeans had. And they also had greater equality for women than the Europeans had. But that's not mentioned in the history books. And the reason for that is, in our thinking, the Native peoples had to be savages. And that's what justified us as a superior race of people in killing them and taking their land. And the myth survives to this day, and we still haven't come to terms with how these people should be treated. History should teach you to think, shouldn't teach you to be proud.